Our panel will really look at defining issues of our time, individual and collective leadership when it comes to climate change. And as introduced, our panelists wear different facets or wear different hats with the work that they're doing individually and as a collective with the other people that they work with. And we hope that this afternoon will be able to shed a light on the different dimensions of climate change, its leadership as well, but then also have an understanding of the challenges and opportunities ahead of us. Because we often say, oh, climate change, it's a challenge, but then the opportunities there are in, hopefully we can also be able to touch on those. So climate change is a global crisis, but its impact is particularly much felt here in Africa. What are some of the most pressing climate-related challenges facing the continent today, and how are they affecting African communities and the ecosystem that we live in? I'll start with you, Jonita, since you have the mic.
Thank you so much. Part of the work we do is climate education in schools, but also we have climate demonstration hubs in communities where we are trying to engage local communities in getting local solutions and tapping into the indigenous knowledge that communities have to build solutions that can make it to the market. And to just go to your question about the different challenges that Africa is facing. I think before we even talk about Africa, I would still say in our villages, before anything else, we know that in most of the communities, most of the rural communities are depending on rain-fed agriculture. And what has happened right now is that there's change in seasons. For the farmers, the smallholder farmers that we work with on a daily basis, we're trying to find solutions to this to adapt to the challenges that they're facing at the moment. So we see that Africa, like we always say, and we know the statistics that we emit less than 5% to the entire emissions right now, and we are feeling the worst impacts of climate change. One, because we do not have resilience, we don't have working adaptation measures. And so if we also look at all the different angles on how climate change is affecting communities, for example, in Rwanda, this year where we had about 131 people dying in a flood, 6,000 of people being displaced from their homes. And projections are having that if we don't act on climate at the moment, Africa crop yields will decline by 50%. So for me, this is the reason I wake up every day, is because I want to make sure that people know this is happening. Even when you are staying in a place where I can, in case of a flood, in case of a climate shock, I can fly out of the country. How about those people that do not have this resilience, that do not have the capacities to fly, to another country? So I feel like Africa as a continent is vulnerable to climate change, like we say, because we see it. And also we have the solutions, but they're also enablers. Like, what can enable us get out those solutions?
But then you use yourself as an example. Your dad is a farmer. Now he's not able to sustain your livelihood through that. So now you have to stand in. But then again, you're still also trying to figure life out. So we are being forced to grow before we grow. So, Wellin, I'd like to turn to you, Perez. And I was reading your bio, and I'm like, okay, nice things here. So my question, and I see that in your bio, your work encompasses evidence-based policy advocacy, but then also you're strong on innovation because there's a bit of biotechnology therein. So my question to you is, innovation is key to addressing climate change. Juanita has hinted on that. Can you share examples of innovative solutions that have worked, or we think we can also sort of adopt, that are being developed and implemented within the African context, or you can even draw us back here at home that we can get to learn about?
I want to appreciate for the Leo Institute for this opportunity. I just met Awel less than 2 months ago, and here I am. I really don't take that for granted. I really want to get time. Maybe I push him in a corner and ask him why, but it's really a big opportunity for me. Also, now back to the moderator. I'm not a co-founder, but I mentioned that maybe I could have been there when we began this story in Africa, as Replanet Africa. Yes. Back to the question. Maybe also to introduce myself. I'm a public sector liaison and a program assistant there. And most of that is into how do I actually incorporate the work we do into the private sector so that we get these solutions downstream, now that they have the built structures already. So I trained in biotechnology, and having a background in biotechnology gives me some of better understandings of what innovations we could actually be looking at. I just want to begin there. What she mentioned was the challenges we have. When you look at most of the farmers we have at grassroots level, they're actually dependent on farming. All they have is that small garden, and that's where they are doing the food and getting the money. And climate change threatening that, you realize livelihoods are being ruined. So with biotechnology, what there is some of those innovative solutions that speak to resistant varieties that actually are so going to actually help farmers produce even amidst these adversities of climate change. We've looked at several outbreaks of disease. We've looked at long droughts. We've looked at heavy rains, which are not good for crop productivity. But when we talk biotechnology, when we talk solutions there, they speak to varieties that can actually withstand. When you look at the shifts in seasons, how you find whether or not it's a long drought or a short conducive period, we are talking about varieties that are actually yielding in a shorter time. Those are that's what biotechnology brings to the table. And I want to say, when we talk also innovative solutions, we also I want to borrow some of the discussions that we were having in the previous discussion. It was really, by the way, an amazing discussion. It was really a nice one. And speaking to African heritages, now this may not be an innovation, but when you speak to solutions that we are bringing to the table in the face of climate change, we are looking at what are those practices that we actually later on abandoned. When I was coming here, I was carrying a plastic bottle there. Actually, before, I was really happy. I was like, wow, how did Leo really plan not to have some of these plastic bottles here? And then all of a sudden, I saw a young man coming with the bottles. But it's anyway, it's inevitable. We have to take some water. And later on, you remember the government here banned plastics. But look at us. I mean, I have never seen even the slightest of efforts in government. These may not be innovative solutions, but just a ban to plastics is just one of those solutions we could be looking at. I was in Kenya the other day. Before that, whenever I would go to school, my dad would hope that every time I come back home, I'm bringing something, to our family, something new. Because he's a person who likes nice things. Maybe you come and design up a compound. Maybe you tell him, let's buy a flower and put it here. So here is thought, taking me to good schools meant that I would come back home and, on the slightest things, at least do that. Now, when I was in Kenya, I realized that actually these people are doing some work. I want to applaud whatever work they're doing. At the time, I noticed that I couldn't even see any polythene. Okay, to be honest, maybe because I was in the city center. But even when I was home coming back, we are used to packing here in Uganda. It's not, we're used to packing things in polythene. You're going somewhere, you just need a polythene to put in your thing, yeah? And put it in the bag or put it somewhere. So this time around, I couldn't put anything in a polythene. I looked around in the whole room, I checked outside, not even at the shop, could I buy a polythene? I said, what do I do? But anyway, I just packed my things in a suitcase and closed up. That's the only option I had. But looking at how they're actually having bottled water, in glass, I was like, wow, this is what we need here. Here, the competition in Uganda is about who has the best bottle, the best looking bottle. I mean, that is what at least is in the public spaces. I think when we talk to solutions, we are speaking to choices that we make, but also when government does make some of those decisions, which are anyway choices at that point, they should be dedicated and deliberate to actually fighting some of what they were intended to do. The ban here, I don't want to say really is even meaning to anything, because every day I'm seeing a new company. I once worked at a company who were well, back in the days it was hard labor. We were bottling some kombuchas somewhere. And, we're always having these fights because there was a company that was saying we're using their bottle. So when I grew up into these spaces, I said, but why? Why does it look like that? So all I'm just saying is, when we speak to solutions, what biotechnology, for example, does bring to the table are some of those biodegradable, maybe plastics that we could use, something that you throw to the, environment and it degrades. But even then, talking about having some of those maybe degrading bioactive or maybe by microbes that could actually decompose some of these plastics, which apparently now speaks to all that research and innovation in a whole sense. So I want to say, even beginning with us, it's also at a personal level. It's just what you choose to do, you as you. Here, when you buy even a chindazi, well, we have some kind of local thing here. Every day it's going to be packed in a polythene, whether it's the tiniest thing. Actually, this time around, when you buy anything, as long as it is 1,000 worth, they put for you in a polythene. They put for you in a polythene, and we're taking home. So at the beginning, also, she talked about sorting some of the things. So all I'm saying is, when we come to solutions, when we talk to innovations, we are speaking to things that are actually reducing some of these things that are continuously degrading our environment, degrading the climate. Solutions speak to carbon capture. There was a company we had recently, it's capturing carbon, and I was amazed. They were even making shirts, shirts out of carbon. I was like, wow, if people could actually capture this carbon and it's used to some, so there are several solutions that we could actually bring to the table, and this is what I'm actually trying to advocate for. This is the work we are trying to bring to Africa, speaking to communities, giving them better solutions. We actually also speak to energy. When you speak to what is the highest contributor to climate change now, it's energy. 80% of emissions are there from. So I want to say this is exactly what we speak to as Replanet, and we try to bring some of these solutions to the farmers, speak choices, and some of those policies that come with the research, which is the evidence to governments that actually this should be worked on now and not later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Perez. And I like the fact that you actually draw us to the fact that when it comes to climate change, individual, what's the word? My English is not Englishing. Individual efforts actually go a long way in terms of the responses that we actually take. And Some is one of those classic examples of what it means to actually take individual action. Because she's passionate about wildlife and sustainability, she founded an initiative known as World Now Foundation at the age of 18. What was I doing at 18? I can't remember. But maybe Some, you could just share with us your leadership journey and what sparked you at 18. So you know what, let me start this initiative, but then also inspire us as individuals in this room. What role can we play in mitigating climate change and raising awareness that it affects within the communities in which we stay?
Good morning, everyone. I'm a wildlife conservationist, and I run the World Now Foundation and an initiative called Rudi. Rudi is Swahili for we are going back to Narudi. So we are going back to our ancestral ways of living and bridging that with modern science for coexistence. And when it comes to individual efforts, my journey as a leader in the conservation space had to come from a sense of wanting to do something out of volunteership. I'm not benefiting in any way, to keep myself busy, to learn, but to also engage my fellow youths. So I was in high school at that time, and I realized there's a gap between the young people in the urban areas especially in understanding wildlife conservation more so. We talk about climate change, but we don't highlight wildlife conservation, or I don't even understand why it tends to be separate. It's climate change is the major umbrella, and then we have now wildlife conservation, habitat restoration with tree planting, etc. But in regards to wildlife, the animals themselves, a lot of young people in Africa do not understand that specific niche. So with my love for animals since I was a little girl, I've had over 30 cats and dogs and rabbits, name them all. I used to rescue rats, and they would eat my uniform, and it's it's been a mess. But with that passion, I recruited my fellow youths, especially from high school, to go to Nairobi National Park. And Nairobi National Park is it is the only national park in the city. It is a privilege for us to go to the office, and then during the weekends, we are in a wildlife space. And to my surprise, not many of my age mates have ever been to Nairobi National Park. And I remember one of our first visits, one of the students asked me, "Oh, I haven't seen an elephant." We don't have elephants in Nairobi National Park because it's a very small, like a sanctuary. And that just shows you the lack of understanding on wildlife conservation, more so also from my country. But at the same time, I would volunteer in the animal orphanage. I ended up creating a lot of adoption programs for different organizations. You could adopt an animal. You don't have to keep it at home, but you cater for its need, like its veterinary needs, its shelter, etc. So we adopted a cheetah. His name was DG, but sadly he passed away last year. And we started having tree Panda Miti initiative. Panda Miti is Swahili for we are planting trees. So we started having Panda Miti initiatives. And along the way, many people thought I'm doing this under a specific organization, but in real sense, I was keeping myself busy and wanting to support a cause that has an impact in the conservation sector, and that's with Kenya Wildlife Services. So fast forward, I was called to Rwanda to be a speaker in the School of Wildlife Conservation. And I decided to create now the platform that many people have been thinking is there, which is called now the Wild Now Foundation. Thank you. And I tend to think as individual efforts in conservation is major conversation that we need to have right now, especially in a time when everything seems to be more collective, right? So we're having this dialogue, we're having COP28 on the 30th of November. A lot of the petitions you're putting out there is from a top-down system where it's more from corporates and energy companies and then businesses and government leaders and then trickling down to the communities. So you realize even the understanding of what climate change is not there. And climate has been changing, it will forever change, and what we're doing is reducing the rate at which it's changing, right? But not many people are able to understand that concept. Another thing is with Panda Miti initiative, we noted that yes, young people are starting to have a drive for tree planting, but are forgetting tree growing. Which is the most important. So we've planted a lot of trees in Kenya, and then we took a step back. Someone asked me in a panel, how many trees have you planted, Some? And I really thought to myself, how many trees have I planted? Why? Because I'm not sure how many trees have grown, right? And that's a question that we don't ask ourselves. And I see a tree to be just like a baby. You have to nurture it all the way. And it's your responsibility. If you've planted 5 trees here, make sure that it's taken care of and it grows to full maturity. So one of the innovations, allow me to dive into that, is with we created a Panda Miti, Jaza Miti app, which is focused on monitoring tree planting in Kenya. So we plant trees and then we are able to monitor it, of course, now with the satellites. And we have Treaty, which is creating solution for a lot of the emitting companies by keeping them accountable. So you're able to plant trees with the local communities, and they're able to take responsibility in making sure that these trees grow. But the whole concept of this is making people be accountable and environmentally conscious. But going a step further, you're not just doing it for the gram, taking photo, I planted a tree, but also going back on a yearly basis and looking at the updates of your tree, or if you adopted an animal, how is it doing? How have you been catering for its veterinary needs, its shelter, etc. So individual effort is very important. And allow me to go back to the conversation that we had before with the previous panel about identity. I tend to think with the climate change narrative that's out there currently, we have been in a space of activism where again, we do not understand the basis of climate change. And we've neglected now the people who I call now the true activists on the ground. So a short story is with Rudy Initiative, we are featuring a story of an amazing lady. She's called Mama Njeri. For the last 15 years, she's been sleeping in a forest called Lariak Forest. She has a very basic educational background. But when I met Mama Njeri, I bumped into her when I was a kid, but when I met her recently, and we were going through Lariak Forest and the issues affecting Lariak Forest, to my surprise, this lady understands and knows all the plant species in Lariak by name and their importance, medicinal importance to us as a people and also to the ecosystem. And she's aware that in Lariak Forest, there's an area where she calls the maternity room for elephants. So elephants are able to come at a specific time of the season, migrate all the way from the northern Kenya to this forest and get their babies from there. And why this was interesting is because even with elephants, they tend to want to be in spaces which are quiet. But this area is next to a road. It's very loud. But there's a specific plant that Mama Njeri has identified that is beneficial to female elephants that are expecting. Why this is important is because people like Mama Njeri are people who we need to have on the table in the climate change discussion. They have the practical solution. And a lot of this indigenous knowledge, I'm happy that my fellow panelist has touched on indigenous knowledge. And these are the people who we need to listen to regarding solutions that are fit for the local people. But at the same time, understand that we cannot duplicate one solution that worked with one community to other communities. And that is a mistake that we did before.
Yes, thank you so much. I think here you're actually invoking what we call bioprospecting, and I think a lot of research needs to be done in that area. There are several resources we have here in our culture that we've been doing, even the herbal medicine at that. I was talking to the moderator before, and I think we had a lady called Nash there. So most of what's happening now, you see, growing up, our communities had a way of taking care of illnesses. We had several concoctions, like she called them, anyway, they are called concoctions around here, that people used to take. She was talking about a Maria concoction that she called a name that I've forgotten already. So what's happening today is actually looking at some of those solutions that we had back in the days, and then we try to do some bit of science to them and get those active compounds and now make them into the modern drugs we have now. And I think that's what we need for some of those communities. A lot of research done there. And I think also this speaks to, if I may talk about solutions, going to some of those solutions, we need a lot of climate research. We need financing in that area. But speaking to what you asked me, I think one thing you need to know is that for us to even speak to equality, equity, whatever you call it, you need to know in Africa, or even in all communities locally at grassroots, we need a lot of mindset change. People don't yet understand the impact of climate change. They don't appreciate it at all. When you say global warming, now, what's global warming? The other day I was having a discussion. I've also tried to interest myself into the bioeconomy of late because it's one other solution, the route we can actually take to that. And one panelist told me that we are calling it bioeconomy, but in actual sense, when she tries to talk about it, she tells you most of these things we've been doing them here. It's just that of late, we are trying to get the words that are easygoing, like bioeconomy, because they sound, fancy and that. But then she said we've been doing some of the things. In bioeconomy, we are talking about use of these resources, abundant resources we have to power our economy. And I can say Africa could even thrive just on that, using the biodiversity that we have largely.
I think also at COP28, it's always about just transition, climate justice. And we are forgetting that when you talk about just transition, we are saying, how can the transition to the green economy be inclusive and equitable? And we are talking about inclusion and equitable. It actually also goes back to Africa itself. In most of the conversations, we've been asking, there's the energy transition. How many people can access energy in Africa? So they are transitioning from what, you know? Some of these questions have been coming through. And for me, when it comes to the just transition, I'm thinking, okay, if you are going to think about, for example, Uganda has the green growth strategy, and this strategy has been built by, you know, people in the boardroom. But now we can't be talking about the green growth without, you know, who she mentioned, some of these women that are on the ground. And for me, I feel like they would actually make the best transitions because they are the most affected. Because we have, right now we are talking about the green jobs. How many of us are skilled? How many women, how many youth are skilled to be employed in the green jobs, if we talk about the just transition? So for me, it's basically how we want to ensure that, how that can happen is making sure that many youth, many women are in position to actually take on these jobs when they come, or that come through the transition. And when you talk about the energy itself, and you see how many, I think less than 23% are not having access to energy, if I would say. So when we talk about that, it means that I see so many innovations in solar panels, wind, etc. But also accessing this panel on the top of your roof is very expensive. So when you talk about the just transition, we are saying, in whichever policies, in whichever decisions that we are going to make, we are going to center people that are, one, mostly affected, and people that, you know, at the extreme end of the spectrum, that are not low-income earners, I would say. So if you're talking about the just transition, for me means that putting into consideration all these factors in whatever that we are going to be planning. So when we go to COP28, for me, the thing is always about where are the indigenous groups of people in these rooms? Where are they? And when you get there, there are only men in suits. How are men in suits discussing energy that a woman in a village is using every day? I feel like this woman who is using firewood every day, who is using charcoal and enabling charcoal, is in the room to discuss the different problems that they are facing, that, you know, takes into consideration all these aspects to bring about the just transition we are talking about. And also, there's been a conversation about decolonizing COP28. And for me, the thing is, we cannot be calling Africa vulnerable, but also we need to center them in everything that we are going to discuss. So how are we going to keep decolonizing COP28, but also making sure that, I remember also the climate summit in Kenya, where we saw so many, so this is a Africa climate summit, but different lobbyists. I saw people in different oil companies taking over panels and trying to change the way I think everything was actually planned. And we're talking about carbon credits. We are talking about smallholder farmers planting trees for people who are emitting and saying they're offsetting. Now you're offsetting, and this woman in the community has to grow acres of trees so that you offset as a company. What that means is that this woman, for 5 years before this carbon is sequestered, they're not going to have land to feed because they're waiting for the $30,000 that will serve 360 people that are on that project. So these are all things that are happening, and there are no negotiations yet. I know that African leaders are now thinking about how do we have better markets and negotiating and all of this, and but supporting who? Because the women, the people that are at the grassroots level, the farmers who are going to plant these trees, who are doing all this afforestation and planting all these trees you're telling them to plant, and are left out in these decision-making processes. So for me, the just transition topic, I'm still a bit skeptical on how it's going, but also hopeful because these conversations are coming into the rooms, and Africa is actually piquing very good interest in seeing all these different angles. But also we can't talk about the just transition without doing education and capacity building, research and innovation. Because when we talk about the just transition, again, transiting into the green economy, sustainable ways of living, we need better or innovative ways of living, but also investing a lot in data, investing a lot in research. I know that most of the times, even when catastrophes are happening, for example, flood, there is no weather station in the next few meters. You'll find it in like 25 kilometers. And scientists are saying, we don't have this data. So if I don't have data, then I'm not sure how I will support this particular, or create measures for this particular community. So for me, there's a lot of things around just transition, circular economies, and Africa transitioning from what to what, and also how are we involved in this process. If we create new jobs in the green jobs agenda, whatever this country is also having, are we positioned enough to take on these jobs, or that will mean that some of the people will lose their jobs? If young people are involved in agriculture and then they cannot yield anything anymore, are they having space into the green jobs economy, or the green economy that we are actually talking about? So for me, it's basically centering those that need justice, but also if we are talking about inclusive, because justice, for me, just transition means inclusive transition. How are we getting every piece of it in its entirety into the discussions, and making sure that people are not making decisions and policies in the boardroom, and at the end of the day, when it comes to implementation, it's different, totally different, and they're not involving these people. So for me, those are some of the thoughts I would think about just transition, and looking forward to COP28 actually.
Thank you very much, Juanita. So we'll take 3 questions from the audience.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Rita. I noticed that one of the challenges facing, climate change is education, the knowledge of it. And, for most people, they understand on like a broad sense, like the bird's eye view. No one really, most of us don't really can grasp how it affects us personally. So, and, for most people, they would rather leave it to like the government to deal with it, let the government sort it out. Or, entities or individuals like, our panelists here, like people leave it to the enthusiasts, and most of us are kind of like, oh, someone else will deal with it, right? So my question is, what are some of like what are your thoughts on like radical solutions, radical steps that can be taken to educate the masses about how detrimental climate change is to us as individuals, so that we can make individual efforts towards, towards it?
For the opportunity once again, I'm Nelson Agaba. Climate change is a very interesting topic to
1
me.
minute.
And why is that me and you, we get affected at the end of the day? You may not, see it, but for whatever happens, someone talked about subsistence, farmers, at local levels in the household, they know how they are affected. And coming from that background, it is a very, very, very big problem. But maybe to say, argument to governments here in Africa to say, how do we invest so much? Because we all know that, for example, how do we invest in recycling or capturing carbon and, to ensure that we can productively use it instead of it being emitted in the skies?
Climate change being an issue of social responsibility, just like the first panel gave us an insight on how to forge a way to a common ground, how to forge a way to a common agenda. How best can youth seeing opportunities in climate change not see the opportunities in terms of funding? I know a lot of people going into it because it attracts funding, but see it as an issue of social responsibility to sustain the environment, as an issue they can take into aims of advocacy to demand more in terms of infrastructure and capacity building, than going into it for purposes of maybe opportunity, but go to it for purposes of sustainability. Thank you.
First of all, you asked why are we concerned? Well, I have children. And I think that's very obvious, because their future is still ahead of them. Now, I usually do not engage in conversation on climate change. And Nicholas is smiling because he knows it, because I do not engage in conversation on complex issues that I do not understand. Okay, so, and I do not understand really climate change. I do not understand all the implications. I do not understand all the interdependencies. And everything that has been mentioned, I really see for any complex issue, there has to be all of these efforts. right? The awareness, the education, the mindset, the individual action, innovation. I really believe a lot is not about ideology, but technology. But being economist myself and working in the political space, I think the questions really also, or the answers have to start, first of all, taking the human being as it is. And it's not perfect. Human being is not perfect, and we cannot expect from everyone to be aware and now to, to be very responsible and so on. I can educate my child, for example, when she gets an ice cream, to get a cone and not, a plastic cup and not a plastic spoon. And now she is starting conversating with the seller why she is not taking a plastic spoon. We can do it, but let's be honest. That is an action that is good for one person, but does not really change the big picture. To change the big picture, I really think we need to take the human being as it is, and I find the human being quite a rational, rational being, right? So, meaning, if I have a job to do, and the streets are bad, and so on, I will take my car. Don't expect me to take my bicycle to get from Buya to Kololo. I will take my car. If the program or the school of my child starts at 7 o'clock, my job starts at 8, I might send her with another car, maybe to get to school. Those are rational choices that we make because maybe I have worked for a long time and I need to sleep. My approach to this is we start to regulate individual life, okay? And as much as we should be aware and take individual actions, I think we need to really approach that from the perspective what actually informs the decision of the human being.
So to go back to radical solutions, when we talk about climate education, so we have been doing curriculum for children in schools, both national and international. Now, we've been looking climate change is a co-curricular activity because we asked that it is a co-curricular activity in these national schools. We asked and then they said it can only be a co-curricular activity and you can't come at 10 a.m. to say, oh, it's a session. So we've been doing in national schools co-curricular activity on education. But surprisingly, or the good thing is that the international schools have given us 5 hours to actually run the curriculum within their entire session or lesson plans. So for us, we think that the one thing that we can try to achieve is ensuring that climate change is also gotten into the curriculum.
I believe with climate change, it's not enough to tell people to conserve the environment. People have to see other people's doing it. So Anna, even when you tell your kids to not use a plastic spoon, it's like a snowball effect. Another kid will notice, and another one, and another one. So it becomes a collective effort. I do agree that it's a focus that we should have. I think one of the things that we need to do is when you're educating the young people, we need to put it in a way that is also entertaining, mostly because of how the complexity of climate change. But something like pollution, land and air pollution is something that we are leveraging on now the filmmaking industry to educate young people. But yeah, I think I can talk.
All right, thank you.